Welcome, everybody. This evening, we're just going to be sipping green tea out of this Jurassic Park mug and kind of going through how I tracked and recorded the new song Going Under. That's on this kind of rock album project that I'm doing. So hopefully maybe you'll learn something. Again, I am by no means a master sound engineer mixer or whatever, but I just think it was really valuable for me to see how other people did stuff, and so maybe you'll learn something, maybe you won't, whatever. But basically, my philosophy on tracking and mixing things are to not treat them as different entities. I kind of think of the tracking process as absolutely being part of the mixing. And what I mean by that is that, like, every time I'm recording a source, I'm thinking of it and how it's going to sit in the mix, because I learned a long time ago that actually tinkering with stuff in a mix is something that I have very little patience for, and something I just generally am not that good at. Like, I'll just, like, the longer I spend on a mix, the more likely I am to make it sound worse at the end of the day, right? So I try to get things to sound as perfect or as clean as I can get on the way in. Therefore, when I'm mixing stuff, it kind of turns out better in the long run. So anyways, I'm going to start off by talking about the guitars, because the guitars are kind of the driving force behind this entire track. So definitely, if you haven't seen the track, I'll link below, but you probably should have seen that by now, or else I don't know why you'd be watching this. Anyways, the guitars I tracked through my Mesa cab and my Mesa head. It's a 525 Express, and it was on the crunch channel with the gain dimed out all the way and set at 25 watts, so the tubes are really screaming. And I tracked it with an SM-57 in the absolute middle of the speaker right next to the badge, which I'll put a picture up of. And I generally like, for high gain stuff, using the 57 over maybe like an Audix i5, because it kind of has that throaty mid-range that kind of gives the guitars a lot of punch, which, I mean, pretty much everybody uses a 57 for that anyways. But I'm going to play some of the tracks just on their own. What I did is, one mic on the guitar. I used to try to stereo track guitar tracks by using maybe like one mic on one part of like the cone, and then maybe like either a condenser mic like set back or something like that. But I could never really get it to sound like I wanted to width-wise. I mean, I'm sure I've had a lot of phase issues and stuff like that too. So what I've actually learned when it comes to high gain stuff, especially kind of like riff stuff like what this song is I would almost always prefer the sound of a double-tracked electric high-gain guitar. Now, if it's something where I'm doing kind of like a Strat thing, where I'm doing like acrobatic Strat Jimi Hendrix type stuff, like where I know I couldn't really duplicate the same performance twice, then maybe I'll look into stereo tracking a cab. But otherwise, I actually kind of like taking single lines and just doubling them up. So for instance, what I mean by that, I'm just going to play the left channel track. So what I did is I stereo tracked it, and then I just had one in the left channel. I panned them hard left and hard right. So for instance, this is going to be what the left channel sounded like. And then the right channel is a different performance. Again, same mic placement and everything, but I think I changed the pickup selector on the Musicman. So that was the neck pickup in the right channel and the bridge pickup in the left channel. So when you put both of them together, you get a... So it kind of creates kind of like a chorus effect. I'm going to put the Logic screen up here in a second. But to me, I think that's a good way to get width and just kind of beef up a guitar track. And there aren't really any plugins on this guitar track at all, but we're going to get to that in a second. All right, so I also want to talk a little bit about the process that I use in like writing a song and recording it. So what I'll do is, since I'm primarily a guitar player, I will track the whole thing on guitar first, right? And I do that to just a click track. And I know this is just going to be a scratch track because I'm going to redo it anyways, but I like just kind of fleshing it out. So if you see here, I have like these color-coded kind of parts, right? So this first yellow part is like the intro where it's just the guitars. The red part is like the chorus where it comes in. The white would be verse, blue pre-chorus, red chorus, so on and so forth, right? So I have an idea of the organization of the entire track all the way through, which I think is super important. And I used to not do this. I used to just kind of like do it as I'm going and just add different parts. But I found that like really the more organized you are, the more you can kind of spend time to get things to sound the way that they should. And then what I'll do is I'll jump on the drum kit, and record a scratch drum track that is probably not in time because I'm just kind of jamming it to see what the groove is going to be. Because usually that's the first time that I even get a chance to see what the drums are going to sound like. Like, I'm not a good enough drummer where I can like play the drums in my head. I kind of have to like really kind of groove with a track to see what I'm going to like play on drums. And then what I think is actually the most important part is setting up a digital drum machine loop, right? So if you see this green stuff right here, if you've ever used Logic before, you know that the green stuff is MIDI. I'm going to solo what I kind of had out. So what I did is I opened up Contact, which is a Native Instruments plugin, and I used the drum machine here, right? The studio drummer thing. And I really just kind of like found where I was hitting the kicks, and just basically I built the basic groove of what I was doing drum track wise, and then I recreated it with a MIDI keyboard. Actually, I didn't really play it. I just kind of created notes and kind of dragged them to where I wanted them to be. And then I ended up with this drum loop, right? So this is just kind of a generic drum loop that I knew I wasn't going to use, but what ends up happening is it becomes my new metronome, because when I'm retracking guitars for real, I kind of find that if I have an actual solid drum track to track to, it always ends up way more in time and way better and so much tighter because I'm tracking to a perfectly synchronized drum track, right? So I actually don't end up using the MIDI track because I'm not a really big fan of MIDI drums. I like the performance of an acoustic kit almost always better anyways, but I actually have it there just as like a super high dynamic metronome to help me keep in time. Yeah, so anyways, I still have the green stuff there just to see it, but it's not in the mix at all. It's just there as a guide for me to kind of plan stuff out, right? So after I have that, then I go and I redo all the guitars. Now, if we look at the total amount of tracks in this session, there's 21 tracks, right? And if we count the scratch guitar track and the MIDI track, it's actually less than 20 tracks because those tracks aren't actually even in the mix. Like you can see for the first part, these two ones up here are the main guitars. This right here, this actually isn't a track that you'll hear. It's called the mix bus track, which is what I'm getting from the analog summing thing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, most of this is really just like the drums. So if you want to hear what the drums sound like on their own, I can kind of mute or solo the drum bus. So if you notice, there's really not a lot of processing on the drum kit either. This is all just kind of like volume automation, not even automation, just kind of like leveling it the right way. And I have a Native Instruments passive EQ plugin on it just to kind of, it's like actually really just, I start with the drum bus preset and then I just kind of go from there just to make adjustments and stuff like that. But really, I just think it's something that kind of lifts the high end a little bit and kind of gets some of the mud out of the middle of it. But yeah, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got 8 drum mics going. I have an Audix SCX25 on the hi-hat. I have 2 of the toms mic'd up with D2, D4, Audix D2, D4. Snare top and bottom, which are both Audix i5s. The kick drum is an Audix D6. So far it's almost all Audix. And then the overheads, I have a stereo pair of Neumann KM184s, which I have going through the Universal Audio 4710. So I have 4 710 preamps on the Universal Audio thing. Sorry if this is getting boring, but this is just kind of like the tech stuff. And 2 of them are going through the overheads. The other 2 are the snare, right? The kick and the snare. And then the 6176 has the snare bottom. So I kind of think that those are the most essential preamps that I have. The toms, I just use the stock Apogee preamps because I think they're fine for toms. I'm not really like a huge tom player anyways, but yeah, that's pretty much how I have the kit mic'd up. And the bass guitar is just going straight into the 6176. So all together, it sounds like this. There's the guitars, drums. I got a So if you can see here, really the most processing I have on this is on the vocal track because vocals need a lot of work. I'm definitely not a Chris Cornell or Matt Bellamy type. So what I have going on here is I'm tracking the vocals through a SM7b into the 6176. And then the first plugin I have is the Native Instruments solid EQ into another more surgical EQ. To me, the solid Native Instruments one just kind of enhances the sound, and then I can kind of like get a little bit more surgical with like the stock Logic one, which is really cool. After that, I have the VC160 Native Instruments compressor plugin to kind of level it. My favorite plugin ever is this Kramer tape plugin that Waves makes, and I use it for a couple different reasons, and the slap delay is actually what you'll hear on the vocals. So if I like kind of solo the vocals real quick, and then the very last thing I have is the RC24 reverb. Not super high, it's like 11% on the total mix. But anyway, so here's just the vocal take on its own.
I got a foot in the grave and an eye on the door. One bad, bad feeling and a dozen more.
So, you know, it's not the cleanest thing, but I think it kind of fits the song. And again, this isn't really like the most creative mix because I think like the soul of the song is just like a very like aggressive rock type sound. So I just kind of wanted to get everything in there and have it do its own thing. I think in future mixes, I'll probably have like more automation and more plugins and stuff like that. But this is really just kind of like a basic get everything in, have it find its own space, and then just let it do its thing, right? So the Kramer plugin is something I can't recommend highly enough because you can put it on a mix bus, you can put it on stems, you can put it on just a vocal like this. This is just a one-tracked vocal, and here it is to kind of like to demonstrate the difference with it and without it. So here's with it.
I got a foot in the grave and an eye on the door. One bad, bad feeling and a dozen more.
So I just feel like it's kind of, even with the reverb on there, it's kind of dry without it. Then when you add it, you get a little bit of that
grave
delay.
and an eye on the door. One bad, bad feeling and a dozen more. Looking in my...
So totally dry with just the EQ and compression without the waves and the RC24.
Grave and an eye on the door. One bad, bad feeling and a dozen more. Looking in my direction.
Whatever, you know, it's all right. It's not the most compelling sound. So that's why there actually are quite a few plugins for me on the vocal track. I mean, a lot of people like just love plugins. I'm not crazy about like loading up channel strips with a lot of plugins and stuff like that, but the vocals kind of needed it, so that's basically it.
Calling me a fraud. Counting black clouds, praying for a little rain. Flip a penny in the ocean and pray for a hurricane.
So you can see there's not a lot going on in the mix other than just like what you see is what you get. Now, if you look at the automation, there's really not a lot going on either. Some of the guitars, the muted guitar, I did kind of bump up a little bit. You can see right here for the verse. And then I brought it back down.
Close my eyes and feel the pressure change. Hold on.
So if you can see this right here during the pre-chorus, since kind of more stuff is happening, I bumped the vocal, automated it up 2 dB, and I kept that through the chorus.
Hold on now as it crumbles around me. Hold on, gotta hold on now to the devil now that has found me. I can't help myself.
So up to this point, everything composition and arrangement wise is the same instruments. Really not a lot going on, just drums, double track guitar, bass, and vocals, right? It isn't until we get to the breakdown where the other guitars come in. So again, the breakdown being... So here I'm getting a lot of feedback from the original guitars, which I just kind of like let go in front of the amp. And what I introduced was just kind of like another guitar. I think this is the Gibson 333, just kind of like playing along with it. And then another one's just kind of chugging on like that open D thing. And then once we finally get to the solo, I have a double track guitar solo. Which I tracked the same way I did the original guitars, except I threw that through Native Instruments guitar rig, and I started with a preset called God's Love, which is the absolute best kind of soaring guitar preset in the Native Instruments Contact library, in my opinion. And then I kind of shut some of it off, like I shut off the tube screamer, but I kept the delay and the reverb in there because I think Guitar Rig actually has some pretty awesome reverbs personally. But yeah, so that's what I did with the solo guitar. Like without it, that's just the cab, that's just the Mesa, and then with it. So as you can tell, it totally opens up the entire thing. And basically, the drums finally come back in. Now, if you'll see what I'm doing is I'm soloing buses a lot. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm using a piece of gear called the Dangerous Music D-Box, which is an analog summing device, right? So what that does is it gives you 4 stereo pairs that you can analog sum together. There's a lot of opinions on analog summing. Basically what it means is like whenever if you have like 20 tracks, like I've got going on right now, the computer is kind of crunching those numbers into a 2-bus, which is your just main stereo out. Your final mix is being crunched digitally into a 2-bus. What the D-Box does is it allows you to create 4 pairs of stereo stems, which theoretically give each kind of stem its own sonic space and width, and it kind of analog sums them all together before it goes back into the DAW as its own 2-bus recording, right? So if you notice back in the DAW thing, the one that I have the mix bus plugin, wherever I put that in, right here, right? This track right here, this is the entire mix. So when I'm done with the mix, when I split the mix into 4 stems, and the way I did this was the first stem was just output 1 and 2, which is just the drums. So all my drums are going to 1 stereo stem, which is technically 2 tracks, but I think of it as like 1 stem. And the other thing is all the guitars go to the next stereo stem, right? So output 3 and 4 is my second stem. The vocals is its own stem because there's stereo plugins, so it needs both. And the bass is also a stem too. So I basically have guitars, drums, bass, and vocals, each with their own stem that I'm summing together into one 2-bus stem. And once I sum them together, I take that audio, re-import it back into Logic, and then record it in real time. So once I have a mix, I have what's called a printed mix, which is like if you're like in the old days or people who work on a console, they'll take their final mix and they'll print it to tape or something like that. I'm essentially doing the same thing, but I'm printing it back into Logic digitally, and it just kind of makes it sound better. Like how much better does it sound is kind of a very hotly debatable topic, but it does sound better, and I have noticed improvements in my own mixes as I've done stuff just from like using it, stuff like that too, right? So basically, yeah, there isn't even any more automation until the very, very end when I'm kind of cleaning it up. From going And you can see I just kind of cut the tails off of some of the stuff that was a little messier. A lot of the distorted electric guitar is never totally quiet, so I just kind of automated down at the end. But that's essentially it. Now you can see there's like a little bit of EQ, like I put the passive EQ up on the bass, right? Just to kind of make it sit a little bit better with stuff. You can see that I've bussed different parts of the drum kit, like the snare and the overheads. I bussed to an instance of the RC24 reverb, the same reverb that I used on the single vocal tracks. And that's kind of how I just got like the space of the entire sound. So it's really not a complicated mix at all, because I mean, that's just kind of my philosophy. Like I just want to get everything sounding as good as I can on the inside, on the way in. So once it's in there, I have like very little work to do. And this is kind of like a system that I've gotten better with over time. I definitely think that like maybe a much more experienced engineer could do a lot more with it. But for me, it's just kind of good. And my philosophy is it like, you can also see there aren't really a lot of cuts in any of these tracks. Most of these tracks are just one take. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they were the first take, but I'm not really big into punching in. I'd rather just kind of get one organic take. And even if there are mistakes, like you may have noticed, like the drums aren't like to a grid tight. Some of them, like the kick is off like a little bit. And to me personally, that stuff just doesn't really matter. Like I feel like I captured an adequate performance on the instrument that I was doing. And this is kind of like, do you want to draw the line of like having like as perfect a performance as you want, or do you want to have like kind of like something that you were really feeling? So if the kick's off like a little bit, as long as it's not too bad, or if maybe I'm like missing a downbeat by like a hair, that kind of stuff doesn't really bother me. I kind of think it adds a little bit. People would disagree with me, whatever. I think it sounds good. That's just kind of my own personal philosophy. So that's basically how I mix this. And now I'm going to really quickly bring up the mastering thing, because I did just do a self master. I think when I finally get ready to like finish the album, which is going to be soon, I've got a guy who I send these mixes to, and he's going to master them. But in the meantime, I just kind of master them myself. So I'm going to really quickly open up the different thing where I mastered that 2-bus track, just to kind of show you what I use, which is really simple. So, all right, so this is essentially one of the simplest mastering chains that you can get. So I just imported the 2-bus track that I printed from there, and then I threw, really it's only 2 plugins on it. I threw the Kramer tape back in there. They have kind of like a mastering preset that you can start with, and it just kind of opens it up and gives it a little more top end, which I don't know if you can hear that hiss, but that's also the same thing. Oh, by the way, this is recorded in 88.2 is the sample rate that I recorded in, so it's the same sample rate that I'm mastering in. And then I threw in the Waves L3 multi-maximizer just to kind of it's really just like a limiter, that a multi-band compressor limiter or whatever, just to kind of get the whole thing up to competitive audio quality. And last but not least, I have like a multimeter, which it kind of just shows you how good your mix was as far as like how good the stereo bus is. So like if you see it. I got a foot in the grave and an eye on the door. And just to show you the loudness with this on and off. So that's the loudness without the limiter. But yeah, the multimeter is cool because it kind of shows you how well in balance you are. So I just kind of put it up just to make sure. I mean, you always want to go by your ears, but it sounded good to me. It checked out, it ended up being okay, and yeah, that's it. Basically a pretty simple, quick mastering job just to kind of get it up to a competitive volume level. So there you have it. That's pretty much how I did it. If you have any questions, please let me know, and thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks.